Sword was a boring fighter. I don't think what I'm saying is too controversial. His game plan was the main culprit of this. It lacked any depth and was insanely annoying to deal with, being heavily reliant on spamming his M1 and E for insane damage and self-sustain. Needless to say, I really wasn't a fan of him, so I got my hopes up pretty high for the rework. I had two main things I really wanted to see from this rework, the first being an overall nerf to him, as Sword is way too powerful for how insanely low skill floor and ceiling he is. And secondly, some actual depth. I wanted Sword to be interesting to play, not just a brainless brick wall. And when the rework dropped during Deco deploy, I was pleasantly surprised to see that not only was he more fair to fight now, but he was also actually fun to play now. And along with that, he still kept his low skill floor, making him an excellent tutorial character still. I'm honestly really happy with how the rework came out, and I'd like to discuss it. Alright, so what changed in Sword's kit? Well, the first change to notice is that his health pool is different now. Before the rework, he used to only have 25 shield and 150 HP, making for 175 HP total. Now he has 75 shield and 125 HP, giving him 200 HP total. Now it may sound like his survivability is better now, but when we start discussing his passive, you'll soon learn that that isn't the case. So, what is his passive now? Well, instead of just getting a temporary 5 shield and M1 hit, Sword now has a meter he can build up by dealing or taking damage. Once this meter is full, he can hit R to activate it. When it's active, all of his cooldowns will use an empowered version of itself, doing a lot more damage than their unempowered versions. The meter will be ready to use at 100 points, and building the meter depends on what attack Sword uses and how much damage he takes. His M1 will grant him plus 10 points on hit. All of his cooldowns will give him plus 5 meter on hit. Finisher will completely refresh Sword's meter when he uses it. When Sword takes damage, half of what he takes will be converted into points, so if he takes 50 damage, that's 25 points towards the meter. The meter will stop gaining points when it reaches max charge, so you can't just keep gaining more and more meter to try and nuke somebody with multiple empowered attacks. Meter will also never go away until either you use one of your cooldowns with meter active, or if you die. So make sure that if you're low and aren't too confident you can get out alive, just let your meter rip. Now let's get onto the actual attacks Sword has. Starting with M1, and there's no difference here. M1 could only be considered a problem when it was combined with his old passive, so without it, the move feels a lot less powerful and more balanced. It probably is overall the best move in his kit now, however, just due to it being the best attack for meter gain. Blade Beam has actually received an overall nerf. Its damage was reduced from 20 to 15, which is actually pretty significant. It is also no longer instantly cast like old M2, but rather has a 0.3 second wind-up time now. In exchange, the cooldown was shortened from 8 seconds to 6 seconds. Now for the empowered version of Blade Beam, the damage increased from 15 to 20 and gains some other properties. After firing the projectile, it won't go for an infinite distance like it normally does, but will instead boomerang back to Sword after about 130 studs. And yes, it will hit people on the way back. If anybody is hit by empowered M2, people around them will take 15 AoE damage, making this a really good move for dealing with crowds. Oh, and both versions of Blade Beam go through walls now, so have fun of that piece of information. Next move on the list is Dolphin Slash. There's not really any changes to this move. The hitbox was increased, making it a whole lot easier to hit people with this move, but that's all it got. Same damage, same height, same Dolphin Slash. Now empowered Dolphin Slash is where it's at. The hitbox on this thing is kind of ridiculous for how much damage it does, which in case you're curious on how much damage it does, 39. 15 on the initial hit, just like unempowered Dolphin Slash, and 8 for every spin it does in the air. This is a great move for quickly closing out a kill due to its high damage and big hitbox. Lastly, we have Lunge, which thankfully got nerfed. At least in the unempowered version, that is. It can no longer grab people. No more 100 damage off of one move for Sword players now. At least if you don't have meter, that is. Empowered Lunge is pretty much the same thing, but it can grab just like old Lunge. So I think it goes without saying that this is easily the strongest move out of all the empowered ones. It may have a 0.2 wind-up time while empowered, but the absurd damage you get off of this is insane still. Especially since you'll get half your meter back off of this grab most of the time. And Finisher doesn't have any changes besides filling your meter out. So if his kit all explained, how does he feel to play in game? Well, first things first, Sword is a lot less strong now. While his damage output is higher now thanks to the meter, the loss of his self-sustain is incredibly harmful. Unironically, he would be a terrible fighter if they didn't change his actual health value and only gave him more shield. The additional 25 HP just gives Sword the additional life support to keep him a strong pick still. Without a healer, I can really see him struggling if he isn't too careful now, which is, to be fair, an issue quite a few fighters have. Like in the melee category, Katana and Banhammer might have self-sustain options, but they're still incredibly slow targets with massive hitboxes. And then Skateboard and Biograph only care about enemy healers. But don't let that scare you off from playing Sword, because he is a lot of fun to play now. And for me at least, a big part of that is just because he's weaker now. Playing really strong characters can kind of feel a bit boring to me, especially when said character already has a pretty low skill floor and ceiling. So Sword, being a class of real depth, is actually a very welcome change. It's fun to use my meter, getting big damage from it feels earned. Okay, mostly earned. Another thing I really like about Sword is that he actually has his own niche now. Before the rework, I would have considered Sword a heavyweight, alongside Katana and Banhammer. Lackluster mobility, but they can take a real beating. And then Skateboard and Biograph were lightweights, a lot more fragile but able to dish out tons of damage really fast. But now with the changes to Sword's passive and his increase in damage, he doesn't feel like he fits in either category, but rather his own, a midweight if you will. And personally, I think it's really good that Sword's like this. It gives more variety to the category, which is always a great thing. But I've really gotta stress that this is still an overall nerf to Sword. He's a good melee still and without a doubt a strong pick, but he's definitely been put in this place with this rework. I would recommend not running Sword as your only melee. Instead, try running with another melee, preferably Katana and Banhammer, as Skateboard and Biograph are a more lone wolf kind of deal. Or pairing of any support minus subspace works well for him also, especially Vine Staff or Boombox. So, overall, Sword's gone weaker, but it's also made him a lot more fun and unique, and I consider that to be an overall net positive. He isn't useless no matter how much you make it sound like that admittedly, but do try to remember you really aren't as strong as before. If Sword's rework went this well, then honestly I have my hopes up for any other potential rework that come. They did mention there might be another one coming with Phighter 15 to make sure you don't play too similarly, and I'm really holding out that that rework is for Boombox. But that's all I've got to say. See you later.